Alright, so today we're going to be comparing two different plate techniques. We're going to be looking at streak plate techniques, the streak plate technique as well as the bacterial lawn technique. Of course, before you do anything in the lab, you need to make sure that you're following proper PPE, so you're wearing your gloves and your goggles and your lab coat. I've already turned on the heat gun, so that should be ready to go soon. The first thing we need to do is label our plate. So it's already labeled with what I had already grown on here, the agar. So I'm going to now label it as E. coli. And I'm going to do the streak plate first. So I'm going to say E. coli streak plate. And I will write the date. Today's date is the 11th of November. So I'm going to say November 11th, 2017. And it's really important to remember to label your streak plate so that if it's sitting in the incubator or the fridge, you know what it is later. So I have that on there. I have my initials that say that I was the one who made this plate, so I know that in the future as well. So the first thing you need to do for a streak plate is to get your bacteria. So in this case I'm using E. coli. I have my E. coli here, and I'm going to unscrew this. I'm going to sterilize my loop, so this just goes right in the heat gun. These are kind of like Bunsen burners, but they are specific for inoculation loops. So while that is heating up for a little bit, I'm going to keep the lid on this for a second. And of course, it's always good to have a clean lab space so you're not contaminating other things or getting things in the way or making a mess. So I think my inoculation loop is ready, so I'm going to take it out of here. One way to test if it's too hot, because you don't want to burn any of your samples, is to just touch it on the side of your agarose. And this one is good. It's not burning through the, or I'm sorry, the agar, not the agarose, the agar. So I'm going to open up my E. coli, and I'm just going to, actually I'm going to swirl this around a little bit, get all of that E. coli moving in there. I'm going to just dip my loop in there and bring it out, and I'm going to streak it. I'm going to, hopefully you can see this, streak it like this, back and forth on one edge of your plate. You don't want to get it too far out around the rest of the plate. I'm going to stick my loop back in the heat gun, and I'm going to close the E. coli. I don't need the E. coli anymore because what we're trying to do with the streak plate is to isolate those colonies. So I put a lot of bacteria on here first, and then I'm going to use my inoculation loop and spread out that bacteria. So when you look at it, if you kind of hold it up to the light, you can see those streak marks where you just use your inoculation loop. So I have my inoculation loop in the heat gun. It has probably sterilized by now, so again I'm going to test it just on the side. It's pretty good. And I'm going to look at where my lines were before, which are right here, and I'm going to just touch the edge, the first edge, to that and bring it out. And now I have my second line. So what should happen is the first line that you put the E. coli on will have a lot of growth. The second one will still have quite a bit, so you're kind of dragging that out, but hopefully it's going to spread out and disperse, and there will be less on that second streak. So I'm going to do this 3 times. So I've already done it once. I'm going to do it 2 more times, and it's really important to make sure that you put your inoculation loop in the heat gun between each streak so that you're killing all that bacteria that you just spread out on your last streak. And the other important thing is to make sure that you are touching your second line to the one before it, so you can see, oh, so the bacteria is going to spread out in there. So again, my heat gun is ready, and I have to make sure that I know where my lines are going to go. Okay, there it is. Test the, okay, that's good. And here I go. So again, if you can see that, just going lightly on the top, but making sure to cross that last line that you did. Another important thing to remember is when you're using these inoculation loops, they will puncture through the agar fairly easily, so you have to make sure you're using a light hand and don't jab it into the agarose, or I'm sorry, the agar, because it won't grow that way, and that's not the purpose of it. So just light streaks back and forth, And we're ready to do our final streak. Again, you can kind of hold up to the light if you don't remember where your last lines were. and I can see the mine right here. So I'm going to get my loop, test it on the side. It's good. And here is my last streak. There we go. All right. As always, you should store your Petri dishes upside down, so if there's any condensation that gets on the lid, that it will not fall onto your plate of bacteria. So our streak plate is done, and again, the purpose behind doing a streak plate is so you can isolate single colonies of bacteria. With a bacterial lawn, which is the one we're going to do next, so I'm going to label my plate as it's going to be an E. coli again, bacterial lawn. So E. coli, bacterial lawn, and the date is still November 11th, so I'm going to say 11/11/17, and my initials because I am making the plate. So the purpose in a bacterial lawn is to get as much bacteria as you can. So you would do this in something like a Kirby-Bauer or disc diffusion test where you're testing an antibiotic to see how much it's inhibiting the bacterial growth, or if you're trying to see how well a bacteria grows in certain conditions. So if you change the type of agar, you could test out the bacterial growth with different types of agar. So today I'm just going to demonstrate the way that you would make a bacterial lawn. There's a couple different ways that you can do this. If you have a spreader, those work really well, but we're just going to use the inoculation loop that we've been using. And again, remember that the heat gun is hot, so be careful when you're taking things out of the heat gun. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get my micropipette, and I'm going to use 500 microliters of E. coli. So I'm going to change my micropipette, and I'm using the 1000, the P1000, so it should read 50 on the side of it. Make sure that you have pipette tips that are sterile, ready to go. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open my E. coli and my pipette tips, and I'm going to get a pipette tip, get 500 microliters of E. coli in there, and I'm just going to squirt it right onto my plate of agar. All right, waste. And of course, it's really important to keep everything covered for as much as possible so that you're not contaminating anything else. So I'm going to put this back over here. And I'm going to take my inoculation loop that's been sitting in the heat gun, so it's sterile now, and it is really hot, so you have to be careful. Again, you don't want to touch this to the table or anything that would make it no longer sterile. And again, touch it to the side of your agar and see if it's melting at all. So ours is not. And you're going to take that little puddle of bacteria that you just put on there, and you're just going to spread it around as much as possible. So this should not be very hard. Just spreading it, especially get it to the edges as much as possible, and you can see the liquid moving around. Now, that 500 microliters I put on there, that would change in different labs, so make sure to follow the lab protocol and the amount of bacteria that they want you to put on there. And again, be careful that you're not puncturing the agar with your sterile loop. So I've got my inoculation loop and my bacteria all over the bottom of this plate, and I think I'm good to go. So I'm going to put my inoculation loop back in the heat gun. Again, it's really important to sterilize your loop after each use so that you're not contaminating anything else in the lab with the E. coli. And again, we're going to store them upside down, and I'm going to put these in the incubator upside down so the condensation does not get onto the agar. And I'm going to incubate them for about a day. So tomorrow I'll come back and check these, and the streak plate should have isolated colonies of bacteria, whereas the bacterial lawn should have just a full lawn, just like your lawn of grass outside should be covered in that E. coli.